Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Neka Okoli. I'm an enterprise account manager at Taboola, and I also lead up our Taboola Black Employee Resource Group, which supports Black employees at Taboola in the US region. I partnered with Susie, who leads up our Taboola and Culture Employee Resource Group that supports Black and other minority ethnicities in the EMEA region. We're here today with June Sarpong. You may have seen her on TV growing up. She's a diversity inclusion expert and award-winning author. We're also here with Jasmine McElroy, who's a DEI strategy expert. She's worked at numerous tech companies. And we're here to really have an amazing conversation about diversity in the workplace, specifically about the Black experience during Black History Month in the UK. So we're really excited to have everyone here. It's gonna be a really great conversation, and Taboola is really excited to be able to have these two individuals here and kind of foster this. Mark Thomas, who leads our EMEA region, is going to be moderating the conversation, and I want to bring everyone's attention while the webinar is going on. If you have any questions, we do have a Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom. Feel free to throw your questions in there. We're going to have some time for Q&A at the end. But yeah, everyone, let's get started. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to Mark.
Thank you, Nick. I really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Well, welcome and thank you for joining. It's really, really great to have both of you here, June and Jasmine. Thank you for your time. And as someone who's been in digital technology for around 17 years, I'm always really happy to have important topics like this covered, in more mainstream conversation. Over the last year, we've seen things like education. We're seeing young Black men and women power through, coming through with first-class honor degrees at universities more than ever before in the UK. We're seeing in the US now, 18% of Harvard administrations now, are Black, and considering the population in the US is now around 30%. So it really shows that how we're able to over-index, and the possibilities in front of us are just immense. All this is encouraging, but at the same time, we haven't necessarily seen everything replicated for media and technology. We know there's a lot of things to do. So with this in mind, I've got 6 or 7 questions, depending on time, to cover with both of you and sharing your wisdom and knowledge. And just a reminder to everyone, if you've got questions for any of the panelists, just please throw it to us. It could be questioned with an anonymous, or you could put your name, however you feel. But anyway, let's get started. So my first question. So in the past, Black representation in media and tech has been far and few between. However, over the last few years, we've seen a slow rising of popularity with a bit of Black representation. But how do you truly think things have evolved in terms of representation in the media? What do you think has been a catalyst for some of that change? And actually, for the first one, I'll go to you, June, if you want to start with that.
Of course. First of all, Mark, thank you so much for having me. Huge thanks to you and Eke, and of course, Susie, who may have had a baby by now.
Well, her due date is today, but I'm not. Yeah, let's hope she's not dialing in.
Exactly. Thank you all for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to speak alongside Jasmine as well. Obviously, I'm speaking from a UK perspective more than a US perspective, but I think in the UK, in terms of Black representation on screen, when I first started out in television over 20 years ago, I was often the only one. And particularly for my generation of TV presenters, there weren't many. And like I said, I was the only one. And then in terms of scripted programming, you could still count on one hand how many actors actually got leading roles. And even supporting roles were rare, and certainly definitely not in front of the camera. I think what's happened over the past, I would say 5 years or so, is much more representation on screen. And you see that in the data in terms of Diamond, which is the data collection for the UK. But where there is a huge problem still is behind the camera. I mean, the numbers are minuscule in terms of diverse talent actually writing shows, actually directing shows, producing shows, all of the senior above the line roles. There are not many. So I think for my industry, there's a real big problem. And for your industry in terms of tech, a massive problem, because we see that there aren't enough talent of color in STEM subjects to begin with. And then even the ones that are there up until now haven't been given the types of opportunities that they deserve. So there's a long way to go. But what I am hopeful about is there's definitely a sea change. And I see investments into writers and directors in ways that I've never seen before. I'm seeing money being set aside. And, you know, if we take an example like a Michaela Coel, when I was starting out, there's no way somebody like Michaela Coel would have been given that much artistic freedom to create that kind of show. So it's nowhere near it needs to be, but it is moving in the right direction, albeit very slowly.
Got it. Thank you, June. And then Jasmine, from your point of view, you know, working kind of within tech, how do you see it?
Sure. I think June made some really, really great points, and thank you all for having me here. Super excited to be part of this panel discussion. I think in addition, I'll just add that it's kind of like the representation is well evolved, or is evolving more according to who. The National Research Group did a study asking Black Americans how they felt about representation in the media, and 2 out of 3 Black Americans said they didn't feel properly represented. So I think from my perspective, there may be increases in certain numbers and things like that. And there are decreases in certain spaces, just depends on that space. But I think we could do a better job of really understanding what representation means to the people who are or are not being represented, versus seeing it from some of the perspectives of other folks that are taking a look at things. So there's a bit of bias sometimes in some of the the ideas of what it is, what it means to be represented. So I guess my long-winded way of saying that there is representation in number, but there's also representation when it comes to how people are actually feeling about being well represented. And have we talked about intersectional identities of Black people? Black people are not a monolith. So even if we have more Black people on, different media platforms, which identities of theirs? Just the fact that they're Black and we're kind of acting like it's a monolithic, well, we have one of those, check the box. Or are we thinking about other identities, LGBTQ+, people with disabilities, etc.? So that's my perspective on it. I think there's a lot that has been done, but there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. No, really, really good points from both of you. Thank you for sharing. And I think that, when we're looking at this, a lot of it stems from, bigger decision makers, companies that are there, been in place or been in place with power for quite some time. And ultimately, why do you think that companies are maybe not taking a faster enough approach to increasing diversity? Because the numbers are clear in terms of actually kind of the benefits that you can get as, for example, a board member, a CEO, of actually how diversity kind of really impacts your bottom line of your business. So why do you think companies are not taking a faster approach to increase diversity? And actually, Jasmine, do you want to take this one first, and then we go to you, June?
Happy to. So I've been in the diversity and inclusion expertise realm, if you will, for like 10 plus years now. So I think I've seen a lot of what there is to see in a lot of different industries, as Nneka mentioned at the beginning. So from my perspective, I think one of the things that's really important to note is most of these companies were not created with inclusion in mind. So with them not being created, it's very difficult to you didn't start from the beginning. So now you're starting from the middle or from, wherever you are and trying to create this space. So I think that's a huge obstacle. I think another thing is we talk a lot about the business case for diversity and things like that, as you kind of alluded to, Mark. And a lot of times we don't really understand the motivations of leaders. It's not often that just because we have a compelling case that means people are going to really move forward. One of the examples I look at that's outside of specific industry, just something that happened in the United States and had impact around the world, is the kind of rise of the understanding and awareness of the Black Lives Matter movement last summer. And here's the thing, Black Lives Matter didn't start last summer. nowhere close to last summer, right? But why was it that there were all these companies that were like, yes, we say Black Lives Matter now? I feel like before there was only like one or two companies that were willing to say it as a company statement. And so what shifted, there's a lot of different factors there, but the number one thing for me is that certain people who had those powerful positions just made the decision that they were going to do that. And thinking about their motivations, it's not that Black Lives Matter didn't exist before that. So I think I say that to say these companies are going to make those changes and adjustments once they realize that they want to. You have to really want it for it to happen. And it's not just the work of people who are in those underrepresented groups that can just always influence it to happen.
Great. Thank you, Jasmine. And then June, from your perspective, why do you think we're not taking, or companies are not taking a faster approach?
Yeah, well, I think what Jasmine said in terms of many of these businesses, new and old, not being built with inclusion in mind. In fact, being built often with the opposite in mind. And so I think that that's one of the issues. That's where you're starting from. You're starting from a place where there was just never a provision made for this. And then the other thing is, don't forget, you know, for a lot of these, particularly when we're looking in the startup world, homogenous teams have been very successful. And so when you're making the argument for, yes, it's better for the bottom line, et cetera, if you're a tech company, your bottom line is looking pretty rosy, not being inclusive. So then it becomes something else. And it becomes about future-proofing your organization. The fact that the world is changing. There is a massive demography shift happening in America itself in terms of the browning of America. But then let's look at the demography shift that's happening globally. By 2030, over 40% of the world's young people will be from Africa. Almost half of the young people on the planet will be of African origin. So if you are a global business, you better think about what your response is to that. And this new generation are not going to accept the old sort of colonial way of doing things. That no longer applies. And so I think when we look at the response to BLM, which of course was triggered because in part because of the tragic senseless murder of George Floyd, the reason why those businesses responded the way they did, albeit many of it in a virtue signaling way, because behind the black boxes, there was not much black activity happening, but it was because of the way the public responded. They saw that there was a sea change amongst their customers, and therefore they needed to respond immediately. And I think that when you look at the changing social attitudes of young people, not just people of color, young people from all ethnicities, they look at this issue very differently. And I think because of that, even some of the biggest tech companies who may seem completely undefeatable, things could change for them overnight if they don't get it right on this issue. And I think, Jasmine, if we look at where you work, I think that Netflix is a brilliant example when you look at Netflix versus Blockbuster. Blockbuster was a company that did not change with the future. Customers no longer wanted DVDs, they wanted streaming. Netflix bet on the future. And inclusion is the future. So companies that aren't betting on the future, things could change pretty quickly because these things don't matter until they matter. And we've seen that with Me Too. We've seen that with BLM, and we're going to see it continuing as we move forward.
Yeah, really, really well said. No, I couldn't agree more on that. And I think that when we look at and talking about the leadership of some of these companies, I think that a topic that comes up in a lot of conversations that I have is, how do you ensure that Black talent is ultimately supported within the workplace? And I think that it's a topic there where I've spoken to lots of different Black friends, you know, colleagues, ex-colleagues, as to kind of, you know, what could they do with support? And I think that one of the things that kind of came up for me was, you know, how can I be my true self every day in the office? You know, I'm not, if I'm not my true self, it can be really exhausting. And I think that speaking on behalf of, I think of quite a few Black people, it's everyone has kind of been through that at some point in their life. So what tips would you give leadership to try and ensure Black talent is supported more for the future? And I think for that one, June, if you want to go first with that one.
Well, I think the first thing, it's like anything, Mark, and I'm sure you will relate to this. When you're in the minority, you have no choice but to understand the majority. So you can put me in any room where I'm the only person that looks like me, and I'm going to be fine in it. And I'm sure the same is for you, because we've had to learn how to adapt. And so I think we need to flip it on its head. If you're a leader and you really want to know how to support Black talent, well, take some time to get to know some Black people. Let's start there. And put yourself in an environment where you are the only one in the room. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. Try that on for size, where it's just you. So therefore you understand what your colleagues' daily experience is when they are in boardrooms day after day, and they are the only person that looks like them, and the only person with their lived experience, and the only person that will stand up for a certain perspective. So I think that one of the best things that white allies can do is really get proximate, get close to the group that you say you were trying to support, understand them on a personal level, and that will inform how you then apply that in the workplace, and it will come much more naturally than something that's just a box ticking exercise.
And Jasmine, thank you, June. And Jasmine, over to you on that one.
I agree 1,000% with you, June. And I would just add, I think once you've done some of the work where you've done your own research, you've, made yourself more proximate to folks who identify as Black, also find psychologically safe ways to ask the folks how they want to be supported. Again, as I mentioned earlier, people are not a monolith. So the way that I want to be supported may not be the way that June wants to be supported. So how do we understand that in your organization or whatever you're representing? By asking people. But it's not I have a Black friend and I did what June said and I, made some friends, and I just ask people that they don't feel that psychological safety. It's a bit of guessing and checking. You have to kind of dip your toes in the water and then see if it's cold, or you know what I mean? You have to really decide what is it that makes people feel safe. And for example, if your organization already does organizational wellness surveys, think about adding some diversity and inclusion specific questions and looking at those, or having your HR folks look at those based on demographic groups, having certain psychologically safe space type discussions with people who identify as Black. How are you understanding what support they actually want versus just, I've done all my research, which is a great first step, and then assuming what it is that people want. I think that's a really, really big thing. And then secondly, once you find out what it is that is needed as far as support, put the onus on yourself as the leader, as the person who's a member of a group that doesn't identify as Black, put the onus on yourself to actually focus on some solutions and bring those proposed solutions to the group versus we always put the onus on the Black people. Hey, how can you solve everything for us? You said you have a problem. How are you going to fix it? Well, Black people didn't create racism. So I think it shouldn't be on us to fix it. And I get that some people are like, well, I didn't create it either, but you are benefiting from it if you're someone who doesn't identify as Black. So whether that, there's a lot of different things. You're proximate to white, you might be proximate to whiteness. There's just so many different layers here. So I'm not saying that you are to blame for everything that happens as far as microaggressions and racism. But I'm also saying that if you're benefiting from the systems and societies, et cetera, whether you're the top level leader, somewhere in the middle, or an individual contributor, there is something you can do. And starting with creating safe spaces to ask those questions and brainstorming will definitely help.
Thank you, Jasmine. And I think that, when I had recent conversations with someone in the digital industry about kind of, what is their company doing for, Black History Month, and how do they help kind of educate their members of staff and their people. I think that, the feedback from her was that actually, a lot of it is on her shoulders, and a lot of it's on other shoulders. And ultimately, when we spoke about it, we said, actually, if this is something that's truly, truly important and matters to the org, and ultimately the how active the rest of kind of, you know, leadership and other groups are in those topics of and helping people to educate themselves. You know, we need to see more of that, because ultimately it's not on the shoulders of a Black person to teach people about Black history. Actually, it's about everyone to kind of chip in and have a kind of keen interest. So no, I definitely kind of reason with what you both are saying there. And I suppose with that kind of angle and topic in mind, I wanted to touch a little bit about kind of, you know, kind of trying to create, you know, a truly inclusive environment. You know, it's definitely kind of continuous process. And the topic of kind of allies you mentioned, June, earlier, I want to just kind of dig a little deeper there. So generally, how do you find that you can kind of encourage allies to help, you know, drive more initiatives that help support a lot of the missions that we're talking about here? You know, can you provide some, you know, some useful examples of allyship, not just from necessarily like the leaders in the boardroom, for example, but, you know, throughout the org, what could, you know, more allies be doing to kind of help the cause? Oh, I think you were. Oh,
sorry.
There you go. There was always going to be one. I thought it was going to be me.
But is it?
Anyway,
yeah. Well, I think, you know, it's such a great question, Mark, because we're often asked about the need for role models for diverse talent and for people from underrepresented groups. But actually, what we also need more of as role models, particularly for white men in positions of power and positions of leadership, because what we need are clear examples of best practice, clear examples of what inclusive leadership looks like. And I think in the business world, there aren't enough. So I would move to the sporting world. I think that from a UK perspective, Darren Southgate is a brilliant example of an inclusive leader. And Jasmine, if you don't know who he is the captain of the England football team. And what he did, because he had been a player himself and saw the racism that his colleagues experienced when he was a footballer, he decided from the outset, as the captain of the team, that he was not manager, not captain. Shows you how much.
I was going to say manager. He's too old to be a captain now, June. I was going to say, yeah. I hope he doesn't see that. Yeah. Okay, go.
Sorry, Darren. As the manager of the team, he was not going to shy away from this issue. And so the lads talk about racism, and the white colleagues and players truly take on board what their Black colleagues experience. And as a result of that, when something happens, they stand together. And he, as a leader, doesn't shy away from this issue, and he talks about race and obviously supports his players who want to take the knee before a game. And I think that his letter to the British people on this issue was also such a great example of leadership. So here we have somebody that's doing it in the sporting arena. And I think that that is what we also need in the business arena. And if we bring it down, as you say, Mark, in sort of a management level, what I really want to get across is we cannot have this paternalistic, somewhat sort of covert, superior thinking attitude to this. Even all this calling it out stuff has a tinge of that, as in we have to be the ones to defend Black people. No, what it is about is standing side by side and saying, as Jasmine pointed out, that there is a system that is unfair, that if you are white, you have been the beneficiary of it, even unintentionally so. And so as someone that sees yourself as an ally, you are going to identify whatever barriers there may be, even in your department, that may prevent a colleague of color progressing. And you are going to work to remove that barrier. Even if that's all you do, that makes a difference. But it's about seeing people as true equals. And I often get worried when we're going down the, oh, you have to defend, because that's still creating the imbalance that caused this issue in the first place.
Thank you. Well put, June. Jasmine, so from your point of view, how do you see this?
I agree 1,000% with everything you said, June. And I love the idea of focusing on white people having role models of how to be inclusive, versus it always being mentorship just of Black talent, and others who are from underrepresented groups. I adore that. I think another thing to really keep in mind when it comes to allyship is that you are not an ally until you're accepted as an ally. You are an aspiring ally. I think that's super important to note. A lot of people love this badge of honor. I'm an ally to Black people. Are you though? Have you been accepted by the Black community as an ally? If not, then no. You're an aspiring ally. That is important because allyship is action. And again, as I mentioned in one of the earlier answers, you need to know what support this community actually wants from you before you go in and start actioning. So if you're actioning in this particular way, as June mentioned, you put up the Black square, that's cool and all, but if that's not what we asked for, then what is it that you're actually going to get from this, right? Like we're not going to give you that badge of honor. It's an honor to be an ally, and you should want to aspire to be that, but wait until you're accepted first and figure out what it is that you can do. There's some research you can do. There are people you can talk to, especially your diversity and inclusion folks at your company. Like when they're focusing on that, don't lean heavily on people who have never volunteered, have never said, I would like to give you this advice on how to help. Focus on the people who are not. And your other role models, as June mentioned, maybe look at across to another industry or another company to say, who is it that I think is maybe doing a good job with this or may have a good understanding of this, and really lean on that. I think that's super important. The last thing I'll mention is just the one thing you can do, even as an individual contributor or a manager, someone who's not in high level leadership, because sometimes people are like, well, I'm not a leader, what can I do? Share information with your Black colleagues. Have you ever thought about sharing your salary information, for example? And those are things where your company is not going to tell you you can't do that, but it's not something that's posted anywhere. You just are having conversations. Do you know there's someone who, maybe is looking to get a raise or a promotion or having certain things? Maybe you just share with them, hey, are you open to knowing this information, just so you know, so you can you have data points for equity. When some people ask for numbers and negotiate salaries, it's easier for them to be able to say that when they have data. And the people who have the most access to that data have the strongest networks and are usually the most privileged people. So what are ways that you can use your privilege? That's just one example.
Right. And Jasmine, just want to probe on just one point. The second point you kind of mentioned is that if you're looking, let's say, allies come in all shapes and sizes. Some of them will be reasonably what I call kind of confident, maybe even extrovert, that they feel that they can go and ask people from the Black community, actually, how would you like to be supported, as you kind of put it. But if someone is more introverted and is someone that doesn't feel necessarily comfortable either in certain situations, not about just this topic, but about a few different topics, do you have any kind of tips or advice as to kind of how someone with those kind of personality traits could also be a bit of a support benefit? Because otherwise, we may find that there might be more people that generally feel more confident about having, let's say, conversations that are slightly to the edge, or conversations that they generally in the past felt more awkward bringing up and discussing. And then the people who are, slightly more introverted, but very smart, really want to help. How can we kind of encourage some of those with some of the points that you raised there?
It's an excellent question. And I would venture to say, first of all, the people who feel super confident just walking up to a Black person and asking them for their perspective without having established a relationship first probably need to relax. I think that that's something where I wouldn't say that there are people who should just be able to do that without, again, as I mentioned earlier, some psychologically safe space being created. But for people who are more introverted, I love that we're talking about these different types of diversity. I think it's something where do your research. As mentioned before, really focus on what are some of the things you can read. There's a lot of articles, videos, folks who are speaking that you don't even have to talk to that can tell you, here's within the tech industry, here are some statistics. Here are certain things that people are noting. You can look on certain threads like the app that's called Blind, that there is, and I don't love the app name, I'll be honest with you, but that's just my thoughts as from an inclusion perspective, but that those types of apps, or Glassdoor, the ones where you are able to kind of look at other people's feedback, see if there's anything that's related to diversity there that you might note about your company. There are other ways versus just talking to someone directly to find that out. A lot of it is research-based. And then the action part is also research-based. If you find that, hey, here's one of the issues, maybe you brainstorm with some people that you do feel comfortable with. Maybe it's in the chat function and it's not always, speaking out loud if you don't feel as comfortable, or maybe you write your talking points out before so that, a conversation can be a little bit more comfortable. But I say all that to say, it's going to be very personal to you. There's no one who can tell you how to be the perfect ally, because one, I would have to know who you're being an ally to specifically and what it is that they need. And two, I would have to know you specifically and what your superpowers are, what your layers of privilege are, etc. But I think that when you really give it a strong effort, that is how you're going to be the best aspiring ally you can be. And last thing I'll say is it's not going to be perfect. There will be times when you step in it. There will be times when you have to kind of say, ooh, I apologize. I meant it in this way. Here is my intent, but the impact was different. And just accept that. This is a journey. There is no way to get from aspiring ally to #1 ally in the world. Like, it's always a continued journey, and we're all learning how to be allies to different people of different identities and intersectionally.
Thank you. Thank you both. And I'm going to slightly pivot a little bit now off the ally topic. And, we had it was World Mental Health Day a few days back. And I think that, a topic that has come up a little bit more recently is kind of what are we doing to kind of support mental health across Black communities. Now, I know that, when I've touched upon this question before, and there's been kind of mixed views as to kind of how we help or, Black communities with mental health. But ultimately, there are people with different experiences with mental health. And ultimately, I would say the Black experience with dealing a lot of different things, trying to fit in, you have a different view on that. So if I can ask that question to you, June, first, what do you think we should be doing to support mental health across some of the Black community?
Well, I think the first thing I'd like us to do is acknowledge the resilience, the mental resilience of the Black community. I think, again, we have to be very careful how we phrase some of these questions, not specifically at you, but I think that sometimes that issue can be looked at from the negative, as opposed to what Black people have somehow overcome and how Black people still manage to thrive against unbelievable odds. I mean, it's a miracle. It's when you look at it. And so I think I particularly feel it's really important that we acknowledge that. And I actually think that there's so much to be learned for everybody in terms of the resilience of Black people and the way that Black people have been able to still succeed in a world that has been designed to ensure that they don't. So for me, that is something I'm very passionate about. In terms of mental well-being, of course, racism adds another layer of mental stress. There's no getting away from that, and the data is very clear. And I think that we need to make sure that we're looking at the impact of racism, and particularly the racism of today, which is much more covert. It's not as obvious as it was before. So it's the kind of racism where sometimes you have to second guess whether or not that is what you're experiencing. And the pressure of that in itself is such an added burden to then having to get whatever your day job is done. So I agree, we should look at it. But the thing that I really also want us to never forget is the unbelievable mental strength of people of color, and particularly Black people.
Thank you, June. Great response. Jasmine? From you?
Definitely agree, June. And that's so important to frame that getting mental health support and focusing on wellness is not a thing of weakness at all. It's something that's very much strength-based. And I think that's a huge misconception, even just within the Black community, of what does it mean to seek help. And all of us need help. None of us are an island where we can do everything all of ourselves. But one of the #1 issues that we've had, other than just the taboo of talking about mental health and wellness within the Black community, is access. So this is something or I really think we could focus on how do we help increase access for Black people to mental health resources. And that's something that can be done on a person-to-person level or a company level. I'll speak a little bit about both. First of all, on a person-to-person level, sometimes you might have someone in your life who wants to access mental health resources, but doesn't have the financial ability to do so, or doesn't have the time to do some research, or whatever it is. Are there ways that you, as an aspiring ally and friend to someone who's close enough to have this type of a conversation, you fill out your own relationship to decide that? Can you do that? I'll say for myself, for example, there was someone in my life I'm extremely close to that didn't have the financial resources to get started with therapy. And I actually paid for that person to have about 10 or so sessions just to help increase that access. Another thing is, what about your company? Your company has benefits. Usually there's some level of mental health support that's offered there through your employee assistance program or something to that effect. If there's not, advocate for your company to actually get that. And if there is, advocate for your company to take a look at what providers there are. Are there people of color? Are there Black people for your Black employees to actually go to when they need that support? If not, how do you advocate for really focusing on that? I know there's one app called Lyra, Lyra, that I think is in the United States. I'm not sure where it is globally, but that's something I think where they have focused in some ways on having more different types of diverse folks, diversity of folks in a mental health kind of wellness setting. The other thing I'll say is just be very vocal and very obvious, whether it's like by speaking or just by showing images or whatever it is, your LinkedIn presence, on advocating for people to get mental health and wellness support. You can't really see based on the area of this camera and the angle, but this shirt says "My therapist is Black." It's one of those things where I think it's really important to continue to advocate for people to get mental health and wellness. And some of us who are considered to be successful people, letting folks know, hey, I'm successful in all these ways and check all these boxes of business and, making a certain amount of money and having a certain presence, but also at the same time, I need help just like everyone else needs help. Here's how I'm seeking that help: through therapy, through mental health resource and wellness support. So I think that's a huge thing that you can do as someone who identifies, however, say, I do this, I encourage you to try it yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Jasmine. I mean, if you look at, if you fall over, you get a sporting injury on your ankle, you ultimately go and get that fixed. But if there's something necessarily that's not quite, you're not feeling yourself and you need to kind of improve your mental well-being, there's still that view that there's some people don't necessarily kind of take that step, and I would encourage it in a big way. So thank you for sharing that. We're coming close to the time because we've got quite a few questions in the box that we want to try and get to. So I've got one last question, and so the question for you, we'll start with you, Jasmine, just about the theme. Actually, no, I'll start with you actually on this one, June. So the theme around Black History Month in the UK is kind of proud to be, and we've spoken and we've kind of shared examples of kind of how resilient the Black community are across wherever it is, UK, US, wherever, and how well we are doing things like education now and work and things like this. But with this, how do you feel that this pride is starting to emerge and evolve, and what have you personally kind of become proud to be over the years, and why?
Well, I think that in terms of how Black History Month has evolved and the things that I've been proud to be involved in, I think the thing that I'm most proud of actually, Mark, is I would hope being able to open doors for other people and being able to connect talent with opportunities and individuals that they may not be able to access otherwise. That's one of the things that I enjoy most. And that was what was done for me. So I feel it's almost a responsibility to do the same. And in saying that, I mean, to the young people on this call, I think sometimes it's really important to make sure that you know what it is that somebody can do and what role they play in your career progression. Because often what young people do, and I was guilty of this myself when I was younger, in that you go and ask really busy people to be a mentor or whatever, and they don't have the time to do that. But what they do have the time to do is to be a sponsor. And what they do have the time to do is to speak on your behalf when you're not there. And I think it's really important that that is what you access from them, and that is what you ask from them. So you utilize their skills in a way that can best benefit you. And so I would say the thing that I'm most proud of is being able to do that for the next generation of talent that's coming through. It's just thrilling to watch. Amazing.
Great stuff. Jasmine.
I'll try to be quick so we can get to our Q&A. For me, I'm really proud to be, a bisexual Black woman. I'm proud to be a mental health advocate, someone who goes to therapy, and someone who shares my experiences and these stories, whether it's in rooms with executives, whether it's on panels like this. I'm really proud of that. And I'm proud to see that evolving across the Black community in a lot of ways. We have further to go with being more inclusive of our LGBTQ family, of people with disabilities, et cetera. But I do see some progress in us understanding that we are a Black community, but we're not a monolith. We really are. So we have so many intersectional identities, and we're not, we're all Black, regardless of, how we identify otherwise. And I'm just super proud to see that starting to evolve, and can't wait to see it go even further than that, where people can really embrace who they are truly. So that's what I would say.
Amazing. Thank you, Jasmine. Really, really good insights there. And okay, so I've got quite a few different questions. I'm going to try and get to them in the order that they've been sent to me. So just give me a minute. Okay, so I'm going to feel free. Either of you can jump in and chime in on this one. So the first question I've got is, Black people didn't create racism, and it shouldn't be on all those that identify as Black to fix the problems. This really resonated with me. Can anyone share a real life example of someone that leaned in effectively in the workplace that showed they wanted to be consistently active in driving change? Any real life work examples that either of you have?
Oh, I've had so many. I mean, my career wouldn't be possible without it. Most of the opportunities that I've received come from white people, just because that's who's been in positions of power to give me opportunities. And there's a man in particular who was the executive at the time when I was presenting a lot of shows for Channel 4. And he just told all the production companies he wanted me to present the shows. And it was as simple as that. So when they came with ideas, it was, is this right for June? If it is, it gets greenlit. If it isn't, it doesn't. And when shows were greenlit, it was, I'm not going to tell you who's presenting them, but I will tell you who's presenting them. And so that made all the difference, because it meant I was able to get some very big sort of tentpole type shows that helped to sort of make my name known to a much more mainstream audience. That was one person in a position of power that decided that they were going to make it their mission to develop my career. Without it, there's no way I'd be doing what I'm doing now.
Great, thank you. And then actually, I've got a question that I'm going to angle to you, Jasmine, which is, I think a lot of companies are adding DE&I in response to George Floyd, but it seems they're just checking box to say that we have done this and that. I don't think some of it is genuine. Have you experiences in those regards?
That's my whole career. So how much time do you have? I will say, yes, often there are a lot of companies who have been in this DEI space and they're so new to it. And it's, yes, the murder of George Floyd was a catalyst for a lot of companies, but DEI is actually not as new as people think it is. There's a lot of departments that started long ago and haven't made much progress since then. So I say that to say, yes, I've had a billion experiences with this. I think it's really important for us as super talented employees to really think about where we take our talents and how we use whatever power or privilege we may have. And if we don't have any, or we don't have enough to make some of that, then how do we leverage those who are actually aspiring allies, or allies, to June's point? because I think that's what's helped me the most in my career. I will say that I've never seen a place that's perfect at DEI, and it'll never happen. But I will say every single place that I've worked has been better at it in multiple ways than the place I was before. So I've been in a lot of different industries, multiple different tech companies. Where I am now, I feel like there's a lot more ability for me to be myself and really bring what I bring to DEI. I refuse to be a figurehead. I'm one of those people who I'm like, if you don't want to hear my opinion, don't hire me, because I'm not the person who's going to be quiet about these things. I'm just not. So I say that to say, yes, there's a lot of lip service when it comes to DEI. But it's also important to note that these folks have to start somewhere. And what are the tangible things you're actually looking for from your company? How can we influence those things? And if you can't influence yourself, how do you empower someone else with that talking points? Because some of your aspiring allies, if you gave them the talking point, they would go and say the things. They'd be the people in the room that June mentioned about, but they just don't always know how. So if you feel comfortable and you feel strongly, that which it sounds like the person who asked this question does, how can you kind of give someone else a little bit of the batteries in their back, if you will, to advocate for some of the things you're looking for, versus just kind of focusing on the fact that DEI is so new at your company, or it seems like you're not, it's mostly lip service. But what are the things that you can get out of the fact that these new initiatives are popping up? I'd say let's focus a bit more on that, because it's going to probably be more productive. And my thought is better for your mental health to focus on that aspect.
Great, thank you, Jasmine. Really, really useful answers, and you're kind of like touching the point about how to kind of make more of the leadership and the people at the top more accountable as well, which is a great position. June, actually, I've got a question I think would be quite suited here for you. Is that I'd like to know your opinions on the subject of virtue signaling. Both media and advertising are clearly trying to level up representation, but I sometimes see it personally as clumsy and tokenism versus genuine inclusion. Do you agree? Do you agree with this, or is the effort made better than nothing? Hopefully, I've represented that question well enough. But yeah. But ultimately, do you agree with that statement? And is the effort better than actually doing nothing?
Well, I think we have to understand where people are coming from, and that actually, when we understand everyone's lived experience and how that experience can shape certain viewpoints, even if we don't agree with them, it means that when things aren't moving as fast as they should, we have an understanding as to why. And in terms of whether or not something is better than nothing, even if that something isn't that good, I would say yes, because what that something does is it creates a conversation. And once a conversation is happening, then what that does, it also helps to create momentum, which is what we've seen over the past year. And what we have to do this time round is ensure, because, you know, these things have their moment and then things sort of calm down, sadly. And what we have to ensure is that this time round, some of the changes that are being made are sustainable, and that we don't regress, which is completely possible, because we're seeing how regression is happening on multiple fronts in terms of different issues. So, which is why what I would say is, of course, we are not putting the onus on diverse people, but for anybody that knows that they have something else to offer and they feel that they are capable, put yourself forward, even if you don't feel confident enough to do it. Push through that discomfort to maybe go for that promotion that you think you're 5 years away from, because I can assure you, you know, we love our white men and we're not here knocking them, but I can assure you they're not waiting 5 years to think that they are ready for a promotion. They're going for it now. So I would say the same to all diverse talent, because what has to happen this go round is we need people in positions where they are decision makers, so that actually when things have died down and it's no longer the issue that's in the zeitgeist and the issue of the moment, you still have people in positions of power that will ensure that the progress that has been made actually is here to stay.
Great, thank you, June. And then I suppose I'm going to use this as a final question, and maybe both of you can chime in on this one. And this was about leadership, essentially. So to what extent, the extent to which employees integrated in the workplace is the result of leadership style. What leadership style or behavior will influence diversity, equity, and inclusion positively? So can you give some examples of the leadership style that you think works to influence that?
Happy to start this one off. I think there's no real answer to that question. There's no one answer of leadership style. I think the only one thing that I can think of that would go across different leadership styles is being truly open-minded and open with your heart. Because a leader who is focused on I really care about this, or I'm just being open-minded, even if I don't care. Let's be honest, some leaders don't care. They don't, but they might just be open-minded to at least hear perspectives about what's happening or understand that they may need to adjust or do something different. That's the kind of style of leadership, if you will, that would allow for this to move forward. People who are closed off, who are very set in their ways and are not open to trying anything else or seeing or hearing things from other perspectives, that's not going to work, and it's never going to push DEI forward, and it's going to keep your company left behind, to the earlier point that June made. I also think too, using people as advisors and utilizing them in a way that they want to be used, not using them in a negative way, but utilizing people as advisors who can help fill in the spaces or the gaps as a leader that you don't have, or as in whatever role you are. One example is when I worked at Venmo. If you open up your Venmo app, there's certain like gifts or little pictures or stickers if you're in the United States using Venmo. I was one of the people who had to look at every single sticker before it came out to say, yes, this is inclusive, or no, take that out or change that because it's not inclusive. There are ways to do that within your leadership structure. If it's advertising, do you have folks from these different groups taking a look at some of the things before they actually come out, if they're open to doing that? How are you utilizing the position you have to get perspectives versus you thinking your leadership style is by itself is going to solve and be the end all be all when it comes to DEI. It's really about, knowing what you don't know and being open-minded and open-hearted.
Great, thank you. June, anything to add on that question at all?
Yeah, I think what we need to see in terms of leadership style is a balance and an appreciation to all traits and attributes. Obviously, there are certain traits in business, and I'm generalizing here, that are often attributed as male attributes, and then there are those that are often attributed as female attributes, and then obviously how they then intersect with those that are much more fluid on the gender spectrum. And I think that often the only attributes that we've really up until now appreciated are those that are seen as male attributes. And that's why we have this imbalance in the business world. And so I think it's time for the other types of attributes to really also have as much as prominence as the quote unquote male ones, so that the balance that we need exists. Because I think with that, we won't have the kind of unfair and unethical business practices that we sometimes see. I think a lot of the issues around climate change would be addressed with that influence in the world of business. And so for me, that is what I'd like to see next. And that's not necessarily even just from an ethnicity perspective, that is from a human perspective. Because once we have that as the dominant way we work in business, as in all sides of humanity are factored in, I think a lot of the issues we see will soon cease.
Great. Thank you very much, both. And I think that literally that's all the time we've got from the question. I want to say thank you to everyone sending in questions, because look, we haven't got to all of them. There were quite a few that we didn't answer, but we tried to answer as many as we could with the time. And I want to just say a big big thank you to both Jasmine and June, and everyone at Taboola that helped set this event, this webinar up. It's been really, really great to have you both here and share your stories, share your wisdom. I personally got a lot out of it, and I appreciate you sharing.
And thank you, Mark. You were a brilliant moderator. So
thank you both. Thank you both. And I think that, you know, if we're just going to round up with a final thought of kind of saying that I've got a lot's going to come away with me, but I think that, you know, future-proofing, you know, your business is something that really, really matters to kind of business leaders. And I think that not taking this subject, you know, as seriously, you will be there at the end. You may not kind of come through and ultimately be there in the same way that you expect to be there kind of this time from now, and ultimately looking at, you know, all the different things that we spoke about the fact that, you know, you got understanding the motivators kind of behind some of the decisions behind leadership. We want to make sure that leaders, you know, we can truly understand what motivates leaders before going to them and saying, why exactly do we need to kind of put a DEI policy in place, and really kind of help them understand and help truly to understand what motivates them. So there are lots of things to kind of take away. I really appreciate all of the feedback that you guys gave. And thank you for everyone that's tuned in and listened. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. See ya.